Okay, so Sharon Kleinman has a new book out called The Culture of Efficiency, Technology in Everyday Life. Again, if you want to see that. And I do have a chapter in there on clocks, synchronization, and the fate of leisure. And I guess in this very short video, I want to talk a little bit about that. Now, who could have imagined that something invisible could be utterly oppressive? I think one of the most tyrannical inventions in Western history isn't but about 150 years old. And what I'm talking about is that little slice called the minute and the second. The minute and the second are highly modern inventions, and these are things that were unknown throughout the bulk of history. Now, what that means is that we, as moderns, have been subjected to more and more minute by minute, second by second, tightly scheduled synchronization. And I think in order to understand the modern digital age, what we mean by the digital age, and everything from YouTube to MySpace to Facebook to all the new digital technologies, we need to understand the origin of this three-armed despot. And I think it's funny to say, I think it's important to recognize that even though we now hear the word digital this and digital that, digital really began, at least the word digital, it began its entryway into mainstream culture in reference to digital wristwatches. Now, obviously, timekeeping systems, they're found throughout history. We have sundials, and you have water clocks, and there was attention to stars, and you had incense and candles. All of these, could be fairly accurate, but they were geographically local. That is, they were subject to just a kind of subjective region of experience where the people who were there using them subjected themselves to them. Now, it was in Italy in the 13th century that the mechanical clock came about, and this was really a quite significant breakthrough, and it established and, I guess, instituted a regularity in people's lives and in the communities. But even these first mechanical clocks, they were still much less imposing, and they were used in public squares. So they would be set up in the square, and this clock, it was handless. It was just a face, and it had a bell, and it was used so that people could hear what time it was. And only gradually, very gradually, did it become something that people would see, and then slowly the minute arm set in, and then finally the second hand. In fact, the first reliable minute and second hand, they don't appear until about the 17th century. But if it were just the issue of the minute and the second, I don't think I'd be justifying in saying that the digital age is basically a response to the clock. No, I think what we need to understand is how the telegraph took hold of clocks and turned them into watches. Yeah, the telegraph transformed time itself, and it brought people to a new level of social and temporal regimentation. It was basically the telegraph that turned the clock into a kind of a despot. Right? When the telegraph hit, clocks became synchronized to each other, and the time zones were invented. Now, the newly invented time zones were a response to the telegraph, not only because the telegraph coordinated timetables that helped to keep the trains from crashing into one another, but the telegraph created a very odd sense of the other than here not being other than now. Think of how odd the telegraph really is as far as setting up clocks and time zones such that some person could be at a greater distance to you and in the same time zone, while someone very near to you could be in a different time. That was very odd, right? Now, I think the thing to understand here is that as clocks became synchronized to one another, a new notion of work time hit the culture. And work time previous to the mass synchronization that clocks and synchronized clocks made possible, work time meant whatever time the workers showed up. And if you think about the bell tower would ring and people at different distances would hear it, and it would take different times to gather. So there was this local use of time, but it wasn't synchronized down to the way it could be once the clock was turned into a watch, right? What happened is as clocks became synchronized to each other through use of the telegraph, there was all kinds of industry leaders who suggested that increased regimentation in the workplace and in schooling and other places, they sort of subjected themselves to this regimentation because they said that it would promise greater amounts of leisure, that more leisure would be possible if people would be more and more punctual about their work activities, and the argument would be that if they could be more regimented in their work time, there would be quotes quotes more free time. Now, what happened was actually something very, very different. I think we all know, right? We're now caught in a kind of massive straitjacketing, a kind of three-armed despot that rules our lives. Um, Many forms of mass entertainment outside of the workplace, they became just as scheduled and time bound as the workplace had become. It's as if all aspects of our lives had been subjected to some kind of minute by minute demand for regimentation and orchestration. If people wanted to watch their favorite TV shows, they had to tune in at a particular time and be there. Train schedules, bus schedules, movie schedules, all of these, right? It says, the movie starts at the 9:10, or the 10:15. Um, and I think the point here is that because clocks were set in synchronization to one another, it created a massive straitjacket that people thought they were going to get more free time, but what they got was more and more scheduling. So why then is the telegraph so important to the clock, and how is the telegraph and the clock so important to the digital age? Well, I think the way to really think about the digital age is to say that the digital age is the world of 24/7. It's what it is. The world of 24/7 is a world where everything is always already available. It's already there. People in the virtual world, the digital world, they no longer need to try to synchronize with one another. They certainly don't need to get down to the minute or second, because at digital speeds, time is used less as a means for synchronizing with one another and more of a kind of record of the past. As always already there, the digital technologies are basically allowing for increased forms of asynchronous interaction, right? And so you could think about it as people are interacting more and more asynchronously, they're alleviating some of those demands that were earlier felt by the increased demands for synchronicity, right? It's sort of like there was a yearning for a time that was one's own, a time that was less scheduled, a time that was less despotic, and the rise of these asynchronous technologies are what's making that possible. And so today, we can see it, it's all around us. There's like a clash of cultures between what could be called the mechanical age. And the mechanical age, this is where people, they move around through space attempting to synchronize with one another. But there's also a digital age where time and space have been collapsed and the synchronizing is no longer needed. Instead, as always already there, people can act asynchronously, although they're still coordinated in some way. Now, I think until scientists, right, modern scientists, are able to develop, food replicators and or teleporters, there will always be a need to synchronize bodies in space and time, and to preserve perishables and to get those across distances. Material objects and bodies will always need some degree of synchronization. The question comes, for how long will people be able to tolerate these demands and strictures of the three-armed despot? I think the thing for people to really think about, if they want to get into this question again of clocks, synchronization, and the fate of leisure, is to ask, is leisure really possible when life has been structured down to the second by second? If it is the case that we have to be so regimented that our lives are completely controlled, even in its free time, down to the minute by minute, is it really leisure? Or isn't there something about the need for free time, time completely off of the clock? I think if there is a concern, it's that the more that time is digital, the more it's really not free, but it's probably going to be more and more subject to commercialization. And the question becomes, how much commercialization is possible in a world where it's always already available 24/7? Thanks.